Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 8, and we have the context of 2 Kings 17, where we're being told about the ultimate destruction of the northern kingdom, but then eventually it evolves into the southern kingdom as well, as the author will progress to that point, even though we haven't quite finished the narrative context yet that actually brings about this historical moment in the book of 2 Kings. Nonetheless, Israel's judged and the cosmos falls in total decreation. So just to try to rudimentarily explain this structure here, on the left side, we have the idea that when God called Israel out of Egypt and redeemed them by his strong right arm, we have the beginning of creation for Israel. Now, granted, we know that creation begins with God calling light from darkness and then creating everything in the 6 day period that ends with Adam being coronated as king and commissioned as priest. And Israel traces their origins there, as all humanity does. But as goes the way that other ancient Near Eastern stories are written and the birth of every people group, they all have their own creation story that begins very similar to this, with the idea of their gods creating from the primordial chaos a class of sub-deities who eventually kind of rise up to power, almost like the Olympians did over the Titans. And then they assume control of the heavens, and then those create human beings. And then from them, we have the progeny of all of that particular group of people who are born or created to be slaves of the gods and continue to worship them at the god's whim. And all of the cosmos is intertwined in this kind of three-tiered universe fashion, where the abode of the gods is the terrarium where humans and all other created things exist, and then the subterranean realm of the dead. And this is exhibited in picture after picture after picture, from the Egyptians to the Sumerians to the Babylonians and everybody. And the description of this in the Bible is not very dissimilar. So the point is that here we have God, as you see, as I say in the quotation marks up there, creating the cosmos when he redeemed Israel, because as a nation, this is their beginning. Of course, they trace their ancestry back to Abraham with just one man, but they were not a nation until this moment, because they had thrived from a small clan of 70 when Jacob moved them from Canaan to Egypt, to now coming out hundreds of thousands strong. And they are actually a nation who can populate the land of Canaan once they come to decimate the Canaanite tribes there, right? So this is their origin story as a nation. This is how it will be told to all the other nation groups around them who inquire, who are these people that come from Egypt, right? In the middle column, we have a breakdown of how God decreated Egypt by working through this series of plagues to take them from full order to complete nothingness. And then we have the same idea being reflected by the prophet Jeremiah when he's speaking of the moment Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Jerusalem, um, using very similar words and phrases that harken back to the creation story in Genesis, to the decreation of Egypt and the plagues that came upon them in the book of Exodus and so forth. So let's work through some of this. All right. So here on the left side of the screen, we have God created the cosmos when he redeemed Israel. The psalmist of Psalm 74 is heavily reflecting on this. And I would adjure you to read the entire context of that to kind of piece together all the clues so that you've got the context firmly established. But, to work through what we have here, the writer says, remember your congregation, which you purchased long ago and redeemed as the tribe of your own possession. So he's starting off with their origin story being the moment when they were delivered out of Egypt and born as a nation, right? Yahweh redeemed them. And then he says to him, remember Zion where you dwell. Point being is that Yahweh established his holy mountain. That is right from the heart of the creation story itself, because God's garden, Eden, is on a mountain. And this is the way all of these ancient Near Eastern creation stories begin. Even that of, as I say down here, the Memphite creation myth, calling this primordial mound out of the waters as Ta, the god who is responsible for creation based off this version of the Egyptian creation mythology, brings this out of the murky waters and creates upon it the entire lands of both Upper and Lower Egypt, the lands of black and red sand that are watered with the lifeblood of the Nile, right? That's the whole idea. And the same can be said with respect to all of these other ancient Near Eastern cultures. As far away as the Mesopotamian river valley, the gods bringing up earth from underneath the waters as they tame the chaotic waters, and then create man upon this to again be their servants. And they have their mountain where they live upon. Hence the reason why the Babylonians and the Sumerians use ziggurats, because of the structure of the Tower of Babel and the reason why all other ancient civilizations are using pyramids to try to recreate that mountaintop garden-esque environment where God dwelt with man, albeit under the auspice of gods, right? So anyway, and then God is my king from ancient times, performing saving acts on the earth. So Yahweh establishes his rule over the people, which is important to recognize the same motif in those ancient creation stories, that the gods make it very known, clearly known to the people that they are responsible for their entire existence and the people owe them their loyalty. It's not quite the same so much with God, but he does remind them over and over again that he redeemed them. So they do belong to him, right? So he has legal right to authority over them. The psalmist goes on to say, you divided the sea with your strength. You smashed the heads of the sea monsters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You fed him to the desert creatures. So Yahweh brings order to the chaos. Again, this is infused in so many different creation stories that this thing, Leviathan, goes by several different names. Leviathan just happens to be the Canaanite name. Apophis in Egypt, Tiamat in Babylon, all the same. Twisting sea serpent of chaos with multiple heads. And the gods, whether it's Marduk or Ra, brings order to the chaos by stomping it out, or Baal in the Baal epic creation myth, right? Hence the reason why I reference that over here. But here, they're not employing this literary device as a way of justifying or truthifying mythology, if anything, and it's not really even a callback to an ancient species of dinosaur. It's just echoing those creation myths to say that it is Yahweh who brings order to creation, not other gods, not other spiritual beings that he works in tandem with. He alone brings order to the chaos, right? He opened up the streams, the springs, and you dried up ever-flowing rivers, right? Yahweh brings forth creation out of this, and he established the moon, the sun. You set all the boundaries of the earth. So this all happened when God redeemed Israel out of Egypt. All right, so hopefully if we got that, I don't have to go through the plagues here to make sure you understand how God is not only passing judgment on the gods of Egypt, but he's going from the Nile, which brings life to Egypt, being first decimated, turned into blood, killing the Nile, essentially, and all the gods and protector gods that worked to try to make sure the Nile was preserved and did all its functions, to now darkness completely covering the land and the death of the firstborn. Egypt's decimated, completely decreated. So then when we get to the idea of Israel and Judah at the time of their captivities, we have the words of Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, who in Jeremiah 4 is picturing this by saying, disaster after disaster is reported. The whole land is destroyed. The Eretz, the earth, is destroyed. But clearly the entire world wasn't destroyed, hence the reason why the interpretive choice of land here, but oftentimes the word can be translated as world as well in certain contexts. So the idea is that all of the world to Israel, as goes their world, is destroyed. Suddenly my tents are destroyed, my tent curtains in a moment. So naturally the dwelling places of man here, Egyptians felt the same thing, right? I looked at the earth and it was formless and empty, taking us back to this moment of complete chaos and darkness as it was in Egypt when God first spoke and brought light and settled himself upon the mountain of his creation. I looked to the heavens, their light was gone. Back to this, I looked at the mountains, they were quaking, all the hills shook. So God is just destroying everything on the landscape now that the mountains are completely crumbling to nothingness. I looked and there was no human being. So now going back to the creation story, there's no firstborn, as Adam was the firstborn son of Yahweh. All the birds of the sky fled. So now that part of the terrarium is completely empty. I looked at the fertile field. It was a wilderness. All the cities were torn down. There's no signs of life. All of creation is completely destroyed. Why is this important? Because if God had created or established the cosmos with the ratification of this treaty with Israel, then he is decreating the cosmos. That means we have to have a complete, total new creation, which is exactly what the major prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, have been prophesying all along, especially Isaiah. So we'll get into more of that when we actually get into our 30-minute breakdown. But I hope this was helpful in helping you see some of the insights here. So tune in for the next lesson.